Experience the kinetic energy of neon lights in motion, where every flicker tells a story of survival, ambition, and deep desire. Our 3D visuals take you into the heart of the storm, where the city never sleeps. Hit subscribe now and keep up with the rhythm of the future. They say you find out what you're worth to a company the moment you stop being useful to them. I found out on a Thursday morning in March, sitting across from an HR rep who couldn't look me in the eye, while the man who had stolen 3 years of my work sat 2 floors above us, probably refreshing his LinkedIn to add another accomplishment that wasn't his. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start where it actually started. Not the firing, not the lawyers, not the settlement. It started with a spreadsheet nobody else wanted to touch. I joined the company 11 years ago as a mid-level operations analyst. Not glamorous. The kind of job where you spend the first 6 months learning where the good coffee machine is and which printer doesn't jam on Tuesdays. I was 31, recently divorced, raising my daughter mostly on my own, and I needed the stability. The salary wasn't life-changing. $68,000 in a city where a 1-bedroom apartment runs you $1,800 a month, but the benefits were solid and the work, at least in the beginning, felt meaningful. The company did supply chain logistics for mid-size manufacturers, boring from the outside, but I genuinely loved the puzzle of it. You'd have a client whose raw materials were sitting in a port in Savannah while their production line in Ohio was running at 40% capacity, and your job was to figure out why, trace every link in that chain, and fix it before it cost someone $250,000. I was good at it. Quietly good. The kind of good that doesn't get announced at all hands meetings but shows up in the numbers every quarter. By year 3, I had redesigned our entire vendor communication framework. Before I touched it, our team was manually cross-referencing emails, spreadsheets, and a legacy software system that still ran on Internet Explorer. I built a centralized tracking system, I'll call it the framework, that automated most of the cross-referencing, flagged delays before they became crises, and cut our error rate by 31%. My manager at the time, a tired but decent man who always had a granola bar in his breast pocket, told me it was the best internal tool the operations division had seen in a decade. He left the company 8 months later. That's when things changed. His replacement came from the executive side of the house. He was the CFO's son-in-law. I'll call him my new manager because that's the kindest accurate thing I can say. He had an MBA from a school I won't name because it would be obvious, a firm handshake, and approximately 0 experience in supply chain operations. What he did have was a talent for talking. He could sit in a boardroom and make 15 minutes of content sound like a strategic vision. The VPs loved him. The CFO, naturally, thought he walked on water. Within a month of taking over, my new manager called me into his office and asked me to walk him through the framework I'd built. I did, for 2 hours. He asked good questions, actually. I'll give him that. He wrote everything down in a leather notebook with his initials embossed on the cover. I should have recognized that meeting for what it was. 3 weeks later, he presented the framework to the executive team as a new departmental initiative, his design. I wasn't in the room. I found out from a colleague who sent me a Slack message that just said, "Did you know your system is now called his last name, Operations Protocol?" I sat with that for a long time. I want to be honest here, it didn't make me cry. It made me feel something colder than that. A kind of clarity, actually. The clarity of understanding exactly where you stand. I didn't say anything. I didn't go to HR. I didn't forward a single email or send a passive-aggressive reply all. I just kept doing my job, kept improving the framework quietly, and I started keeping records. That part is important. I started keeping records. Every update I made to the framework, I documented with timestamps and saved to my personal cloud storage. Nothing proprietary, just evidence of authorship. I kept a log in a simple notes app on my phone. Date, what I changed, why, what problem it solved. I also started consulting with an IP attorney, not to file anything yet, just to understand my options. She was a small firm attorney who specialized in trade secrets and intellectual property disputes, and she told me something I've thought about almost every day since. The best time to protect your work is before someone takes it. The second best time is right now. I kept my head down for 2 more years. The framework grew. My new manager kept adding features I'd designed to his quarterly reports. At one point, the CFO sent a company-wide email praising the innovative technology solutions driving our competitive advantage and specifically named my new manager as the architect. I read that email standing in the break room at 7:45 in the morning, poured my coffee, and went back to my desk. My colleague, who had been with the company even longer than me and had watched the whole thing unfold, stopped by my cubicle that afternoon and said quietly, "Are you okay?" Because I would have burned this building down by now. I told her I was fine, and I was, because I had a plan. Here's what most people don't understand about intellectual property in a workplace context. It's not simple. Most employment contracts include an assignment clause, meaning anything you create during the course of employment using company resources belongs to the company. I knew this. My attorney knew this. But there's a layer underneath that most people don't dig into. Trade dress, process documentation, the architecture of a system versus its implementation, these distinctions matter enormously. And the framework had something unusual. I had built the original prototype on my own time, on my own laptop, before I ever brought it to my manager. I had emails proving it. I had file metadata proving it. The company had adopted and expanded it, yes, but its origins were mine, and those origins had never been properly transferred or compensated. That's not a loophole. That's a real legal question. And by the time I was sitting across from that HR rep in March, I had 2 attorneys ready to ask it, very loudly. But let me tell you how I ended up in that room. About 8 months before the firing, the company landed a massive new contract, the biggest in its history, from what I could tell based on the all-hands meeting where the CEO used the phrase transformational opportunity 4 times in 11 minutes. The new client was a national retailer and the entire operations division was being restructured to handle the account. New teams, new titles, new reporting lines, and new credit to be taken. My new manager was promoted to VP of Operations. The framework, my framework, was going to be the backbone of the entire new client system. I watched him shake the CEO's hand on a stage in the company auditorium, while the slide behind him showed a diagram of the system I had built, with his name in the corner. I went home that night and called my attorney. "I think it's time," I said. She agreed. What followed was about 4 months of quiet, careful work. I met with 2 different IP firms. I compiled every piece of documentation I had accumulated over years. I had the original prototype files, with timestamps predating my employment with the company. I had email chains from before the framework was ever presented to my new manager, in which I described the system's architecture to a former colleague at another company. I had a development history that was, frankly, airtight. The IP attorneys were not cheap. I'll be honest about that too, because one of the most common complaints I've seen about stories like mine is that they make legal action sound easy and affordable. It is not. Between consultations and the preparation of a formal demand letter, I spent close to $14,000 of my own money. Money I had been quietly saving for exactly this purpose for 2 years. That's the part nobody talks about. The long game isn't just emotional, it's financial. You have to decide whether what was taken from you is worth what it costs to take it back. I decided it was. The demand letter was sent to the company's general counsel on a Tuesday morning. By Thursday afternoon, I was called into HR. I remember the walk to that conference room very clearly. I had my work bag with me, the same one I carried every day, nothing unusual. Inside it was a folder with a copy of my own documentation just in case. The HR rep was a woman I had spoken to maybe 3 times in 11 years. She had a yellow legal pad in front of her and a pen she kept clicking. There was also someone from legal I didn't recognize. He didn't introduce himself. The HR rep told me that the company had become aware of some concerning outside activity, that I had been in communication with external parties regarding proprietary company systems, that this constituted a breach of my employment agreement and a betrayal of the company's trust. I let her finish. Then I said, "The parties I've been communicating with are intellectual property attorneys, on my behalf, regarding work I created before I was employed here, which your company has been using and profiting from without compensation or formal agreement." The man from legal shifted in his chair. The HR rep looked down at her legal pad. She told me my employment was being terminated effective immediately. I was to leave the building by end of day. Security would escort me to collect my personal items. I thanked her for her time. I stood up. And then, because I couldn't help it, because 3 years of watching my name erased deserved at least one moment of honesty, I said, "I want you to know that I've been expecting this meeting, and I want you to know that it doesn't change anything." She didn't respond. I was escorted out by a very polite security guard named, well, I won't say, but he held the elevator for me, and that was kind. What happened next moved faster than I expected, honestly. My attorneys had prepared for the possibility that the company would react this way. The termination, they told me, actually strengthened certain aspects of our position. It demonstrated the company's awareness of the dispute and their choice to retaliate rather than negotiate in good faith. Within a week of my termination, a formal complaint was filed. Within 3 weeks, we received a response from the company's outside counsel indicating they were open to settlement discussions. I won't pretend those weeks were easy. I was unemployed. I had a daughter in her junior year of high school who needed things. I had a mortgage. I applied for unemployment benefits, $487 a week in my state, and I picked up some freelance consulting work through a former colleague who ran a small logistics firm. I did not tell many people what was happening. I told my daughter that work stuff was complicated right now, and she, being 17 and perceptive, said, "Mom, are you sure you're okay?" And I said yes, and I mostly meant it. The settlement process took about 4 months. There were depositions I can't discuss in detail. There were documents I signed with my attorney present. There were several moments where I was advised to take a lower number, and I chose not to. And there were 2 moments where I genuinely thought we might have to go further, and I made peace with that. In the end, the company settled. The settlement amount was in the high 6 figures. I'm not going to give the exact number, not because I'm being coy, but because part of the settlement includes a non-disclosure clause, and I've already said more than I'm technically comfortable with. What I will say is that it was enough to pay off my mortgage. It was enough to fund my daughter's college education without loans. And it was enough for me to spend 6 months doing absolutely nothing, which I did, and which I needed more than I knew. My new manager, the VP, the man with the embossed notebook, left the company about 3 months after the settlement. I heard this through a mutual connection, not through any direct communication. I don't know where he went. I don't wish him harm. I mostly just hope he knows, somewhere quiet in himself, what he did. The framework is still running. I've heard through the industry that the retailer account is their biggest ongoing client. The operation system that powers it, the one that started as my solution to a problem nobody else wanted to solve, is still doing its job. My name isn't on it anywhere. But I know, and my attorney knows, and the company's general counsel who signed the settlement papers definitely knows. There's something I want to say to anyone who's been where I was, who's watched something they built get handed to someone else, who's been told to be grateful for the paycheck and stop asking questions, who's been the invisible engine behind someone else's visible success. Keep records. Not because you're planning something. Keep them because your work deserves a witness, even if that witness is only you. Keep the original files. Keep the email chains. Keep the dated notes in a phone app nobody else can see. Not out of paranoia, out of respect for yourself and what you've built. And if you can, talk to an attorney before you think you need one. I know that sounds like something you'd see on a billboard. But the woman I consulted with for 90 minutes changed the entire trajectory of what happened to me. She didn't tell me I had an airtight case. She told me I had something worth protecting, and she told me how to do it. That distinction matters. I'm consulting independently now. I work with 3 smaller logistics companies, and I set my own hours, and I drink my coffee while it's still hot. My daughter started college in the fall, on a full scholarship actually, which she earned on her own, though the settlement meant we weren't sweating the gap. She's studying environmental engineering. She wants to design systems that actually help people. I don't know where she gets it. Last week, she called me from her dorm and asked me to tell her the whole story, again, start to finish. She'd heard pieces of it over the years, but she wanted the full version now that she was older. I told her. All of it. The framework, the notebook with the embossed initials, the HR rep who couldn't look me in the eye, the attorneys in a conference room 2 states away, the settlement. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Mom, why didn't you just leave earlier, before it got that bad?" It's a fair question. I've thought about it a lot. The honest answer is, because I believed in the work. I know that sounds naive, but I genuinely loved what I had built, and I wanted to see it succeed, even if success meant watching someone else take the bow. I stayed because I kept thinking things would correct themselves, that someone would notice, that patience would be rewarded. It wasn't, and it wasn't, and it wasn't. What eventually moved me wasn't anger. It was arithmetic. I sat down one night and added up what I had contributed to that company versus what I had received. Not emotionally, literally, in a spreadsheet. Because that's how my brain works. And when I saw the numbers, I understood that patience without documentation is just hope. And hope by itself doesn't hold up in court. I told my daughter that. She was quiet again. Then she said, "Can I put that in my engineering notebook?" I said, "Of course," and I meant it. People ask me sometimes if I regret waiting so long. 3 years of watching my name disappear from the thing I'd built. 3 years of reading quarterly reports that described my work in my new manager's words. Under his heading, earning him a promotion I never got a phone call about. Do I wish I'd acted sooner? Honestly, no, and I've thought about that a lot. What I understand now, looking back at all of it, the framework, the embossed notebook, the HR conference room, the settlement papers, is that the timing wasn't patience. It was preparation. There's a difference, and it took me a while to see it clearly. Patience is waiting and hoping. Preparation is waiting and building. I was never just waiting. Every month I kept my head down was a month I was adding another layer of documentation, another timestamp, another piece of evidence that said, I was here first. This was mine. My new manager was a smart man in certain ways. He knew how to read a room. He knew how to speak the language of executives. But he made the mistake that a lot of people in his position make. He assumed that because I wasn't loud about what I'd built, I didn't understand its value. He saw my silence as acceptance. It wasn't. It was arithmetic. I was adding up everything carefully, and I was waiting until the numbers were undeniable. That's the thing about integrity that nobody talks about in motivational terms. It's not soft. It's not just about being a good person in the abstract. Real integrity, the kind that actually protects you, is disciplined. It means doing the unglamorous work of documenting what's yours even when nobody's watching, even when it feels paranoid, even when a little voice says you're being dramatic. I wasn't being dramatic. I was being methodical. And methodical is what saved me. I think about my new manager occasionally, not with anger, but with something closer to curiosity. What does a person tell themselves when they take credit for something they didn't build? I genuinely don't know the answer, but I do know that whatever story he constructed, whatever version of events let him sleep at night, it didn't hold up in a conference room with attorneys present. The truth has a way of being structurally sound in a way that fabrications aren't. You can paper over it for a while. You cannot replace the foundation. My daughter asked me once what I would tell a younger version of myself if I could go back. I said, talk to an attorney before you think you need one. Keep your original files. And never confuse being quiet with being weak. Sometimes the quietest person in the room is the one who has already done the most work. She wrote that in her engineering notebook. I'm still not sure I deserve that kind of faith, but I'm trying to earn it, which I think is the only honest thing any of us can do. If you've been where I was, invisible, underestimated, watching someone else take the bow, I'm not going to tell you it's easy to hold on. It isn't. But I will tell you that what you've built doesn't stop being yours just because someone else put their name on it. And the moment you decide to stop accepting that, really stop, with documentation and attorneys and a plan, is the moment everything starts to shift. It shifted for me on a Thursday morning in March, in a conference room with bad lighting and an HR rep who couldn't look me in the eye. I walked out of that building with nothing but my work bag and 11 years of records. That turned out to be enough.